Welcome back to the Fight for Your City podcast. I have a guest that I'm very excited to have, Dr. Mercer. He is the professor of philosophy at Oakland City University, and he's also the dean of Chapman Seminary of my alma mater, my father's alma mater, Oakland City University. Thank you for coming on, Dr. Mercer.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for reaching out.
One important lesson I think that young Christians need to go to at some point, and maybe even older Christians as well, is there's a point where you need to step back from just what you've been taught at church and everything, and you kind of need to reassess the beliefs that you've kind of been brought up on. Not that those beliefs or that theology is necessarily bad or wicked or even heretical, but it's just that it's so important to get to a place where you are looking, okay, what does the Bible actually say? What does history actually have to say about what we're taught? So, we've talked about it before. Why was that such an important element that you all taught your students and still teach your students really early on about getting back to like the fundamentals and even challenging how we think about these theological issues?
I can't tell you how many times I have heard the phrase, I don't need to go get a formal education or anything like that as a minister because the Bible says what it means and it means what it says. Which they took to mean that all I have to do is go read the Bible and then I'll know everything I need to know because it says all it needs to say. And there is a real problem with that thinking. There was a beautiful NFL films. I can't remember which one it was, but it has these two moments. The first thing says, football is a simple game. Mm-hmm. And it just has coaches screaming at their players, get the ball, hit the guy, run. It's like, yeah, simple game. And then it has a moment where it says, but football is a complex game. And it starts having these quarterbacks, call out these plays, Y sprint, X banana, 32, right slash, and what are they talking about? Scriptures like that. There are many things about it that are straightforward and simple, and this is why we bring up our children on it from the very beginning. It's because there are many truths and things that you can just share that way. Mm-hmm. But there are also many things in Scripture that are not so simple. Soren Kierkegaard, one of my favorite Christian philosophers, says the very idea of the incarnation is perhaps the highest and most difficult concept in all of Western culture. The very idea that an all-powerful God can take shape in human flesh. And what does that look like and what does that mean? It's not nearly all that simple. That's what all the early church argument was about. Mm-hmm. If you look at any of the creeds, the creeds start off with, here's God, he's the creator, he's a good guy. It ends with, and the Holy Spirit, he's with the church, hooray. And there's this huge section in between. Mm-hmm. And it's all, and Jesus the Son, and it just goes on and on about who Jesus is, because they're working so diligently and so hard on trying to figure out what in the world happened.
Yeah. Well, what's your response then? Because I'll hear pastors say this and make claims like this, that theology gets in the way of the work of the church, that all that, theology and the complexities that we get into about, for instance, one that's a little thing that people don't think about is like, when did Jesus take on flesh? Did he take on flesh from Mary? Does he have an eternal flesh? That was something that the Anabaptists would argue about, still a thing today. Things about that, things about what some churches would say the Trinity is one of those things that divides the church. Some people would talk about the resurrection of Christ. I'm shocked by how many people I've met that are lifelong Christians, grew up in conservative Baptist churches, but will say, well, Jesus had a spiritual resurrection. His physical body didn't get up and walk around. And so what would you say to churches that say, when we get into the theological semantics of things, that all it does is divide and it's not really that important?
First, it's always good to see the Gnostics are making comeback.
They always are.
Yeah, it never did. How many times proclaimed a heresy? Never goes away. Theology doesn't divide at all. just because you have a difference of opinion or a different way of understanding something doesn't mean that that's divisive. It is really our own kind of how I hold on to that belief. Do I hold on to it with some humility, which is what you started with? You know, I thought I knew this much, and I came and I learned more, which helped me realize I didn't know nearly as much as I thought I did. And so if you approach the idea of, here's a theology that I understand, I believe, and I can support, but you hold it with some humility, thinking that, you know what, God is much bigger than I am, and he probably knows more than I am, and I probably don't have it all right now, even as much as I've studied. Maybe I should give a little grace to people who see things a little bit differently. And so that can be you can have kind of a more open, inclusive, welcoming spirit to somebody else who doesn't necessarily agree. But let me always, as much as I give with one hand, let me take away with another. There's always places where you have to say, no, this is out.
Yeah, I would agree.
So it's not a tightrope that you're trying to walk. It's kind of a pathway, and you can kind of be somewhere in the path. Yeah. But there are times when you are off in the woods, and when you're off in the woods, the church has to stand up and say so.
Yeah. Well, forgive me. I'm not at all going to attempt to call you old by any means, but I will just say that you've experienced a lot more than I have, and you experienced a time way before me. So what I see as someone who's been a young minister in the church today is people don't have a humility when it comes to their personal theology. They believe what they believe. They will be offended if you try not only to change their mind on an issue, but even if you bring up questions around an issue, right? So let me ask, has it always been that people are that protective of their personal theology? Has it always kind of been that way, that people are really sensitive around these issues? Or has it just gotten a little bit worse in this day that we're living in?
I would never say that today is worse than before. Again, as an old person, I think old people do get to this point where it's never been this bad. This is the myth of the good old years, the golden age. It was always better back when. Yeah. Truth of the matter, no, it wasn't better back when. Humanity is still under sin. We've always been under sin. And sometimes we get one thing right while we're getting another thing wrong, and then you switch that up.
Yeah.
So I really don't think it's any worse. What I've always done as a philosopher, the things that I like to look at are structures. And the way structures kind of force us to think in a particular direction. The more denominational we became, it really kind of set up some walls and boundaries. So it was, here is our denomination, and we believe blank, and that's why you get things like the old joke as a Methodist and a Catholic are in heaven, and St. Peter's showing them around, and he says, okay, now we have to be quiet because when we go by this house, it's the Southern Baptist, and they think they're the only ones here.
Yeah.
Okay. And denominations do. They kind of took that up, and they kind of separated themselves off.
Yeah.
I think that structure goes today as you get non-denominational churches, which wanted out of that rat race. But as they set themselves up individually, you get a lot of cult of personality pastors who lead, and they follow a charismatic leader, which I hope pastors can be charismatic and can, kind of challenge and encourage people. But sometimes you get it built around a pastor, and this pastor's so encouraging, I have to follow everything he says, and then again, you're back into the I have to believe exactly.
Well, is that kind of what's happened nowadays? Because I know, back then, even looking historically, if you were a part of a certain denomination, it meant that you believed these certain things about, whatever. If you were Southern Baptist, it meant that you were a 5-point Calvinist, Trinitarian, didn't speak, after the Azusa Street Revival and start of, what we know as the modern Pentecostal movement in the 30s, they were like, all right, we don't speak in tongues. We're not okay with this stuff. and then, Catholics had a certain belief about things and what they did. But now you're kind of seeing this, what I've seen is a shift where denominations are just simply not as important theologically as they used to be, where you'll now see a General Baptist church, which is an Arminian Baptist church, that will have a Calvinist pastor or a mix of things. You'll have
carrying around the MacArthur study Bible.
Yeah, and you'll have Southern Baptist churches who will speak in tongues and, do some Pentecostal stuff. You'll have Catholic churches who will have, based on the priest, might have a more liberal leaning theology and participate and open up their churches to stuff that the Catholic Church would never, approve of. So what I'm kind of seeing now, and I wonder if you're seeing the same thing, is each church has kind of adopted its own individual personal theology that maybe not everyone in the pews agrees with it, but they don't hate it enough that they're going to leave. Does that make sense?
I think one of the, again, structures. The 20th century just ruined certain structures. It was a century of, wars, questions, world wars, Korea, Vietnam, and people were constantly questioning what's going on here. There were huge, even theological shifts going through that, coming out of, Hiroshima, World War II, questions about, does God maybe really kind of feel and experience the pain that we're experiencing? Before that, I was like, no, God doesn't experience those kinds of things. Shifts in theology. And the thing that, the big thing that shifts in the 20th century is this question of whether or not we know who we are. It really became this point of we're not quite so sure as, again, that we are as good or as knowledgeable as what we thought we were. We prove to ourselves that we can fail.
So you would say that the part of that change is that coming out of that humility that we said that was lacking before, that humility to say that maybe the way that my family's been doing it or practicing this religion forever, maybe there's some things that should change or that we were off on. Is that what you said some of this thinking produced over time?
It produced a realization that maybe what we were thinking wasn't right, but I don't think it's ever produced a humility. The humility 100% is honestly a spiritual flowering in oneself. It is something that is cultivated. It has to be disciplined into us. Because we just, humility is not really something that we particularly like.
Yeah. Have you ever read, I say this, surely you've probably read it. I'm forgetting the author's name right now. It was a famous philosopher, and one of his most well-known works was a book called Suicide. That's the translation into French. Forgive me, I'm forgetting the man's name. But in this work, he did a lot of work with statistics. And one of the things that he had found is when he entered into the 19th and 20th century, all of a sudden, the Industrial Revolution produced a time where people, for the first time, took the free will that they had and they actually began to step outside of the traditional paths that were set for them. Because the ideas that we hold so close today, like rights that we would say about, freedom of religion, freedom to choose who you marry, freedom what occupation you have, it existed back then, but it just wasn't as common. Like I think the way Dr. Lau would always say it in class, if your grandfather was a potato farmer, then your dad was a potato farmer, and you were probably going to be a potato farmer. And then you also see up until pretty modern day, it was pretty much going to be decided for you who you were going to marry. It was as much about family connection and what it did for you and just who you happen to be close to. Even just, people didn't leave the cities or towns they were born in, much aside from a major event happening. And what this philosopher had talked about in his book Suicide is that you have this time where people start choosing who they marry. They start leaving the farm towns and going into the big cities to get these industrial jobs that I'm not going to say are paid well, but they pay, I guess, better than, what it had before, different structure. But then
it provided for the possibility of always having something.
Yes.
If the farm does well one year, it could fail the next.
Mm-hmm.
The factory is going to produce every year.
Mm-hmm.
So you may not have a lot of money coming out of the factory, but you're always going to have something.
Yeah.
That was a promise people's life.
Yeah, consistency. And then one of the big things that he talked about was, for the first time, you saw people en masse having more freedom to change what religion that was practiced. Because they were coming out of a time where kind of just where you were born decided what religion you were. Like, that's why you have all these English civil wars that happen. What part of Christianity are we going to be, aligned with, Catholicism or this new Anglicanism? And then you have people who will identify, obviously before them, but now like as Lutheran, the Methodist, and you see these other groups that are coming out of it. But you begin to see people take steps outside of the movement that their grandparents or their parents were affiliated with. And what he saw out of this was when people were given this freedom over the years, you saw suicide rates go up, which was so weird because everything was kind of getting better. Food was getting cheaper, employment was getting more stable. You had more choice about who you were going to marry and what kind of life you were going to live. And yet people, at least looking for these stats that he was seeing, it's like they're getting more miserable than ever before. So do you think that plays a role then too in how our personal theology changes over time, that we're given for this first time in human history, we have more freedom than ever before to decide what kind of life that we're going to live and who we're going to identify as. And yet we still see these suicide rates go up. We see, over time, divorce rates go up. People seem to be more miserable now than ever. So what's the philosopher's take on we're given all of this freedom. We have the freedom to choose and piece together whatever religion we want to cobble up, and yet it's still not working.
Okay, two things. One, it is still all about identity. Who am I? And once we realize we have all this freedom, that gives us a sense that I also have all this power. So if I have freedom, I must have power to pull all of this stuff together and create this new life for myself. And my expectation out of that is that this life is going to be a meaningful one that's going to support me. And it's going to give me that foundation that I've been looking for. And the fact of the matter is that no, none of that's true. I do have freedom. But the power to put together a career, a future, vacation plan, sure. But a power to fulfill a life of meaningfulness, I would argue, is always our ultimate search for God. When I am looking for real meaning in the world, there is really one foundation, one fountain of that. And that is, I am really looking for my connection with God. And it is unfortunate then that what happens is I'm not necessarily finding what I hoped I would find in this particular denomination, so I'm going to jump over to this denomination. And, I didn't find it there. Now, that may be a denominational doctrinal problem, but my first guess is it's really more of a spiritually lost problem.
Yeah. Could it be a dopamine problem? Could it be in the search for meaning, we're just looking for the next rush, but then we're there a year or two and the rush isn't there because it isn't as new or as shiny as it used to be? So could that be a reason that you're seeing people jump from kind of one idea, one religion, one spirituality to another in that search for meaning?
There is no doubt that, first of all, that the long game is the best game. Mm-hmm. Preparing yourself, spiritual disciplines, and working towards that. However, it's not necessarily all that fun. There is none of that rush moment because it's good, consistent work.
Yeah, it's incremental.
It is incremental. But I again, structurally speaking, I think churches are feeding into the rush.
Mm-hmm. How are they feeding into the rush?
Worshiptainment.
Okay.
The very idea that so many churches build their church around the praise music, and it becomes this big production. No, I'm not against productions. I play in a worship band myself. I'm a very average guitarist, but I'm there, doing my thing. And periodically I sneak in a little harmonica in a church. It's crazy. Basically heretical. Nevertheless, it's not necessarily it's not the music that's the problem, but churches turn this into a worshiptainment.
Yeah.
And that means come here on Sunday. You'll like to come here, and maybe you'll even give here, and maybe you'll participate here. But we're going to give you an experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that experience, very often, rather than feeding the soul, feeds like what you're talking about. It feeds the rush.
Okay. So what are we supposed to do then? Because to me, it's always, what's the line of entertainment and giving our best to God? I always think about practically what's the line that's there, because we can throw out terms like entertainment. It feels like a concert. I joke with a friend who pastors a rather large church. I say, I know, like, I'll let you get back to it. I know you have a rock concert to plan for on Sunday, but that's just a joke. But I mean, what's the line? Is it that the moment you bring in a fog machine that it becomes entertainment? The moment you pay X amount of lights? The moment you got multiple camera people coming through? I mean, there's places I know that would probably say the moment you start paying a full-time worship pastor, you're making it about entertainment. So practically, just what's that line that you would draw then?
All the lines are spiritual lines. The lines are all spiritual lines.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly, David has his moment of dancing before the Ark of the Covenant like a wild man.
Mm-hmm.
So much so, his wife is embarrassed at it.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't displeasing to God.
Mm-hmm.
So to be celebratory is not a problem. That's not the problem. The extravagance of it isn't necessarily the problem. But are you clearly leading the congregation with this particular display to put their mind and heart on God? Or is it really something where you are trying to have a beautiful production and you hope that the person out there is realizing that they're supposed to be focused on God?
Yeah. So you would say it's not really a what, it's a why.
It's a why.
What's the reason that you're doing this for? Is it to entertain? Is it to make yourself look good? To make your church look bold and important and like everybody else? Or is it that I want people to be moved, in this moment, and not just like moved and to catch a feeling, but moved that they're going to experience God in a way that they haven't before. And I'll say honestly, personally for myself, I think a lot of churches, I think God uses just about every kind of church to work into someone's heart. I know for me, modern worship, contemporary worship music touches me in a way that I'm afraid a Gregorian chant, doesn't, or else I would maybe go to an Orthodox church or a Catholic church, But I also know people that hymns move them, in a certain way. I will say this. I've talked about it with my worship friends, but I've hear people say, well, contemporary music's just so bad because it's heretical and it has so many false teachings in it. Have you read the hymn books and some of these hymns that are written?
Oh, yes, but here's the funny part. Music, in order to expand heresy, is not new.
Mm-hmm.
It's thousands of years old. Arius and the Arian controversy is you wonder, why in the world did they have to have a council over this? How did anybody know this guy was teaching heresy? Well, he was actually really good at writing songs.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, he was good at writing songs in a port town where sailors were coming in, hearing his songs, and they would go out singing them.
Yeah.
And so the Arian controversy just spreads because of worship music.
Yeah. And so even nowadays we listen to those songs, or we listen to a famous message that a famous pastor is saying, and we adopt that. But let me ask this. We live in the most educated time in human history on paper. I'll say on paper. Majority of people my age have college degrees. There's more people here alive today with master's degrees and doctorates than there ever has been in American history. Why is it that people's critical thinking skills, at least many people's critical thinking skills, have not evolved in the same pattern? We're still falling for the same heresies that people did in the 300s, that people did, in the New Testament. Like we're still dealing with, like you said, Gnosticism. We're still dealing with, questions about the Trinity and all this other stuff. So we've gotten so educated. We've spent generations now in church. Why don't we have the critical thinking capabilities to catch false teachings, or just not even heresies, but just things that are wrong when someone says it?
All right, I'm only here an hour, right? That question is like a 4-hour question.
You can go as long as you want to go.
Education, the people who are educated are, let me say this as pejoratively as possible, mostly trained monkeys.
Okay.
It is not about learning to think through problems.
Mm-hmm.
It is learning that it's essentially one of the biggest problems that we've ever run across is the idea that we are some kind of mechanism. I'm some kind of, my brain is a computer. I am essentially this machine. That's what I do. And so we have reduced our education system to algorithm. Mm. When you see this, you do that.
Yeah, it's like we've loaded up a prompt on ChatGPT.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the people who are really intelligent are great at indexing. They've indexed all the answers. And so even if they don't have it right on the tip of their tongue, what they can do is they've heard your question and say, oh, I read that here, or I know how to go get that now. And they could come up with an answer for you. And it would be, oh, you saw this, therefore you do that. Mm-hmm. Okay, now there is nothing wrong with that, because trust me, I want my dentist to know that when he sees this problem, he does this thing. I want my surgeon to know when he sees this go on, he does this thing. So it's perfectly okay to have a good understanding of A leads to B, I need to do these things. However, what that doesn't allow for is the critical thinking moments. Okay? Critical thinking is an analysis of what somebody else really thinks. So I see A, I'm supposed to do B, and someone over here says, oh, no, you're supposed to do C. Well, now what? And most people will say, well, I was trained to go from A to B, not A to C.
Yeah. So in biblical terms, not biblical terms, in church terms, it would be, well, when I was growing up in church, the pastor said this. Exactly. Or I grew up in a church that said this is how we're supposed to understand it.
Yes.
And there's no evolution beyond that.
Yeah. And we get so comfortable with that kind of thing. I remember somebody who was on a church board, and their church services were just running really long. And he realized that in their bulletin, they had 6 different places for prayer.
Yeah.
They prayed at the beginning, they prayed at the end, they prayed at the offering, they prayed to open the sermon, they prayed to close the sermon. And he says, and they didn't come in with like this little set prayer. Somebody would just start praying and it would go on. Okay. And he said, why don't we cut out 1 or 2 of these prayers? To which somebody said, you want to take prayer out of church?
Yeah.
It's not what he said at all.
Yeah.
So the person was built on that particular bulletin. The board had said, "Oh, we've got 6 prayers. This is what we have to do here." And there was the person had done some critical thinking. This is where we spend all of our extra time. Do we need them all? How about no? And as you say, the uncritical response was, "This is how we've always done it."
Yeah. But when you talk about, theology, for instance, and let's not even just people being resistant to something, because I can somewhat understand people being resistant to something, and sometimes I won't even say that they're wrong. I may think that they're wrong, but I just accept it as, okay, they think differently about this. Like when I get in arguments with my Calvinist friends or my Pentecostal friends, a lot of it just boils down to, okay, we can go to this scripture. We can boil it down to this scripture, and all it's going to boil down to is, you see it this way, I see it this way. And that's when we get into the philosophical and theological questions about things. But it's like you said, it's not just as simple as, what does the Bible say? Well, the Bible says this, and we can't agree on what it's trying to say here. But what about the moments where people hear something, and despite all of their education, despite the years that they've spent in Sunday school or going to church, they hear something and they don't know that it's wrong? They hear something and they don't immediately identify, wait, that doesn't make sense, or that shouldn't be how we read the Bible, or that shouldn't be how we think about this matter. But they don't do anything about it. It even may spark a thing in their head, like, hey, that doesn't make sense. But they'll just go about their life as if nothing's wrong. Like, what do you think about when people are going through moments like that, where they know something's wrong, they know something might be heretical, but they just don't say anything and they just keep attending church?
There is a fault of the church, and that the church often follows the algorithm rather than teaches the congregation to think through the issues, the beliefs of the church. There's a fault of the individual who, when one is uncomfortable, one should lean into that and say, how do I now understand this? How am I going to work my way around it? Okay. How in the world do we go about fixing any of this? I would lean more on, this is the issue for the church than the individual. Because most individuals, and let me be honest, I'm not all that mechanically inclined. I'm a philosopher by trade. And so when my plumbing goes wrong, I call a plumber. I need the guy who knows
as I do.
Let's get this plumbing problem fixed. And that plumber, who may work 50, 60 hours a week, but faithfully gets up Sunday morning, maybe faithfully goes on a Wednesday night, he is being as faithful as he can be to himself and to his family. Now, if he comes upon a problem, he's got 50 hours of work during a week that he's got to really worry about. So if it's not the church that is encouraging and teaching and providing a place of real learning, then I know that guy has his own responsibilities to his faith, but also he has his responsibility to keep his family fed. So the church really needs to bear most of this.
Is that a problem that you think permeates in the church today, is that there isn't a place, it's no longer really at all a place of intellectual discussion? And it's not that I think that every sermon has to be an intellectual exercise. Obviously, there are churches who, they pour a lot more into, emotionalism. There are churches that every Sunday they're going to talk about mental health and anxiety and depression. There's churches that, they're going to preach the Bible verse by verse. And there's some that they're going to bring up some really difficult theological questions, and they may not even give a direct answer to those questions, but they may try and give you the tools that you can use to figure out, where you stand on something. So let me ask, do you think it is a growing problem that many churches are not focusing on the intellectual side of humanity?
Yeah, let me put it like this. Are you friends with your pastor? Do you all go out and eat? Do you spend some time? You ever seen a movie together? And how many pastors actually have a lot of friends?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of pastors, they are working all the time. Their downtime is then, I got to focus on my family. And you'll find that a lot of ministers are going through burnout all the time. They're all the fire to get into the ministry, and then they're just falling away because a church will burn a guy out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means, when you are carrying that much load, the easiest thing to do is to follow the program.
Yeah.
And when you're following the program, you really don't have those moments of challenging people as you should. You ought to be challenging your congregation.
Mm-hmm.
And as you say, maybe not always on Sunday morning. Maybe you want that to be as open and as broad as you can possibly. You got to find some time to challenge your congregation. But when you challenge people, the reason why you go and get an education is not so that you can learn the one thing that's right. It's so that you can be able to address everybody's individual question.
Yeah.
Because they'll all hit you from a different direction.
Yeah. And I think from my experience, I've experienced churches that I think delve a bit too deeply or maybe too constantly into intellectual questions, theological questions in depth. And where I come from, my education, so there's been no shortage of that kind of teaching. But I've gone to churches, and I have to tell you, it bothers me that every Sunday that I've been there, it's asking the questions that a seminary student would be asked at a master's level course, right? I remember, I'll never forget, I went and visited a church with some family, and they told me they had a guest preacher that day, and it was a guy in his 30s who was going through an MDiv program at Southern Seminary. And I was kind of like, all right, I think I know how this is going to go because I have enough friends from Southern. And I'm like, all right, let's see how this goes. And the first thing he goes, it's something along the lines of this. Well, I know that, often we have so much problems about the eschatology and how it works into the ecclesiology and the theology of the church, and just, hits them with a bunch of, crazy, church terms. I understand what he's saying. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about my family that's next to me. I'm thinking about, some of the young people that are there and the moms. I see, some of the older people nodding because they've been here long enough that they're with the program, right? But then I'm thinking, there's someone here today that what he's saying is right. And I'll say a lot of what he's saying is correct. But what is that actually doing to the single mom who's coming in here today with a lot of questions? What's it saying to the guy who just walked in, who's going through a divorce, and he has no idea what he's supposed to do in the situation, so he just went to church. And I feel like sometimes when that becomes our complete focus, we lose sight about the real needs of the congregation. And the reality is, yeah, we live in the most educated society, they say like ever, but also literacy rates are declining.
Right.
Like I think the estimate is right now, like 1 in 10 people should be classified as illiterate. People don't read anymore at all. And so when you have all that, it's not only like, it's not a question to me of like if you're correct, but it's like, are you actually phrasing this in a way that that everybody in the church can actually understand? Or do you have to have a certain level of, theological understanding to even understand the sermon on Sunday? So I say all that to say I think there is a time where it can go a bit too far. I understand there's there's a problem if you don't have any of it. There's also a problem if that's all that you're doing all the time. What do you think the balance is to that then? What does that balance look like for you from addressing problems in the congregation, but also, you know, stimulating them intellectually in a way everyone can actually understand you?
All right. Number one, does every Christian need a seminary level education? The answer to that is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that you get a seminary level education in 3 years like your minister will. You got a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a lifetime. So you should be a lifelong learner. And in that lifelong learning, you will eventually get a seminary level kind of education. Now, next question is, what is a seminary level education? What's it look like? And for the longest time, it really has often been, we just kind of pump you as full of as much theology as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that is an extraordinarily incomplete seminary level education.
Yeah.
It really ought to be at least three things. Good theology, understanding theology, sure, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Number two, can you serve your church faithfully? Do you know how to produce a complex level church that isn't just about, some worship songs, a sermon? Can you actually build a church that encourages this lifelong relationship with God? One where you want to really learn more and experience more and do more in that relationship. Can you build a church that looks like that? And three, are you a faithful Christian? Can you live faithfully?
Yeah.
Because, I can learn the right words and I can do the right thing in terms of service, but I may not be I may not be the person who, has that Christian ethic.
Yeah.
So it's a seminary level education. First has to be lifelong. It really has to involve all those different levels. So that even the plumber who's worked 50 hours a week, if he comes every Sunday, maybe comes Wednesday night, maybe gets encouraged by a sermon to go and look further into this, and the church will bring them along. Very often, good grief, it is so much to produce the rock concert and maybe a dinner on Wednesdays. The ministers are done because they're going to go around, they're going to meet everybody in the hospital and everything else during the week. It's tough sledding to have a fully functioning church.
Do you think that the reason that some people have turned away from the church or don't even consider church to be an option anymore is because they just don't feel like they're getting what they need? They feel like it's too dumbed down. To speak frankly, they feel like it's full of a lot of dumb and ignorant people who are just never going to be as smart as them. Do you think that's a reason a lot of people, especially young people, are leaving and staying away from the church now?
100%. 100%. Imagine the old times, and I'm talking like 1900s. The local pastor was the intellectual, because if he was a pastor, he could probably read. I mean, because he's reading the Bible. Yeah. How many people back then? It wasn't 1 in 10 who were illiterate. It was like 9 in 10 in some places who were illiterate. And so he's the guy who reads the Bible. He's the guy who reads the newspaper. He's the guy who reads, and so he was a person who knew stuff. And we have gotten so far from that, where the pastor can be relied upon because he's in the know.
Yeah. And is that just an education problem? Is it a lack of education problem, or is it deeper than that?
It's also deeper than that, because very often people have a sense of, I'm doing this job, I've got X amount of education, so I can now do the job. And the pastor needs to be 100% in a lifelong education himself. And therefore, one of my, I go to a non-denominational church. Non-denominational pastors can become too insulated. Where are you getting fed from? Where,
Yeah.
Who is your support group, and not just within your church, but beyond it, who can keep you accountable and who can inspire you on your walk.
Yeah, it becomes a lot more of a personal responsibility. No one's gonna make me. I don't have to keep it up for ordination's sake. It's on me to continue to grow and to challenge myself. I've had to warn pastors before. I've gotten looks when they'll like see my library, in the back, and I'll have to warn them like, all right, there's a bunch of people in this library I do not agree with.
Right.
I have a stamp I actually keep in my desk at home, and it's a stamp that says heretical garbage for research purposes only. And I keep it in there because I'm like, all right, I have some pretty wild stuff in here. But, I'm reading it because I want to know about it. I want to kind of know where these people are coming from. And there's even people in there I don't necessarily think are heretical, so they don't get the stamp, but I disagree with. But I think that their writings are interesting. I learned a lot from reading John Calvin.
Mm-hmm.
I learned some from reading, guys like, a John MacArthur, and other people like that. You read people who you maybe agree with their stuff from one period in their life, but you don't necessarily agree with it later. Like there's a lot of stuff where like, all right, Martin Luther was great here. Then you get when he's older, and it's like, oh, that's horrible. I can't.
One of my favorite philosophers to read. I love reading Nietzsche. And Nietzsche is a raging atheist. He hates you and me. Raging atheist. But he's writing in Germany. He's writing in Germany in the 1800s. And German Christianity is just failing all around him. And so when he critiques the church, I look at those things and I go, ooh, he's kind of nailing us there.
Yeah, but it was true in his reality.
It was true. It was true in the church, and sometimes it's very true today.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when he says things about God and Christ, I go, no.
Yeah. Well, he's the one, for people who aren't familiar with it, which is probably some people who are watching the show. He's the one that comes up with the famous saying, "God is dead, and we have killed him."
And that was very much directed. Now, of course, he didn't think we killed God because he's an atheist, didn't believe in God. Yeah. But he really thought that the faithful, who called themselves faithful in Germany, had they were living this complete double life. They really didn't believe, but they still went to church.
Yeah.
Why would you do that?
Yeah, but I see in a lot of young men, like my age and younger now, there is a hunger for intellectualism. I mean, it's one of the big reasons why you see a figure like a Jordan Peterson, for instance, a psychologist, not a philosophy professor, but now as some people are saying, like, he's one of the most influential philosophers of our day. He's not even a philosopher, doesn't have those degrees. And it's not even that I really agree with everything that he says. I actually, on a very personal note, I think it's quite funny where he's become this kind of big voice of conservative Christianity when he himself doesn't even identify as a Christian man, So
and he's very careful to say things like, when I read scripture, I'm reading it as a psychologist.
Yeah. Well, he does.
At least he's honest.
Well, he does. His big thing is he does these speeches where he talks about the Old Testament, but he's reading it as kind of a realist. And honestly, I mean, if you're a conservative Christian, you would hate the way he talks about them, because he talks about them as parables. Not historical feats, not actual like real things that happen. He's talking about it as feelings, or as just ways of thinking, which is how a psychologist would view it.
Right.
But right. I think there is a hunger for it, and it bothers me that a lot of people haven't looked to the church for that, because I understand there's a lot of churches that they're just not going to give you that. But man, we still live in a time where there are some brilliant theologians and brilliant, Christian philosophers, like you say, who are out there to read, who fill me. So let me ask you, what do you think has led to this time where you have a lot of young men, young women who view themselves as intellectuals, or like, reading philosophy, like reading theology, and they're being led everywhere but the church?
It is still a quest for meaning. It's still a quest for identity. And a lot of churches are not providing that for them. And I'm not saying they couldn't find it in a church, but there are a lot of churches that are just not fostering that.
Yeah.
And so if they have experienced one or two churches that are letting them down, not fostering that sense of belonging and identity, then they are looking for it somewhere because we are in the information age.
Yeah.
So they figure it's got to be out there. Everything is out there. But if I'm not finding it in the church, and if the church isn't producing a fertile ground for it, then why wouldn't you go looking for somewhere else?
Well, where do you think people are accepting then? Are they accepting messages that challenge them, or are they accepting messages that they just think sound good?
I think it's both.
Both.
It's a both and. I do think that some people, Jordan Peterson's work, to take him as an example, he is smart, he is intellectual. As a psychologist, he's well studied, he's highly credentialed, he's taught at Harvard, he's taught in a lot of places. So any of the information that you get from him will be good, worthwhile, meaningful, challenging information.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say spiritual, theological.
Yeah.
So people are going to hear that and they'll resonate with it because he is going to, especially when he says things about Scripture, a lot of it's exactly what a Christian might say about it. Here's a good lesson to learn from it. Okay. So when people hear that, they latch on to it because it is challenging them and they do feel like that's motivating them.
Yeah, but it's almost like more of a personal challenge. Not exactly sometimes like a critical thinking challenge. Like I got to think my way through this. Because sometimes, not just necessarily with him, but other people, if you actually start thinking through this, you'd realize how little sense it makes. Or, how maybe historically inaccurate it may be. Or how, I can't remember, but he said something one time about like, well, historically, this is the case for Christianity. And I, knew from my studies, like, no, that isn't true at all. And it's interesting because there's that hunger. People want to think of themselves as smart and well read, but there's not that. I'm going to say ability, but there's not sometimes just not the willingness, to think through it yourself.
Well, okay, now let's go to the other end. If he says something about Christianity, is he really wrong? And my expectation will be not really, but first of all, let's understand the medium within which he's now working.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly YouTube, quick videos, even if it's an hour-long thing. How long does he have to actually do the big reveal of what's the complexity of the issue? It's just not complex enough. Mm-hmm. And sometimes he'll admit that.
Yeah.
Sometimes, look, there's more to it than this, but.
Yeah.
Okay. Now then, here's the other side of what we were talking about. What about the quick and easy and the what's satisfying me right now? Mm-hmm. That's why YouTube works the way it does. That's why TikTok works the way it does. 15 seconds and I've got a joke, I've got something, a little inspiration or whatever, some short that gets some point across in just a few seconds, and I can doom scroll all night.
I'm certain that there's people who say that they go to church and what they mean is they watch Steve Furtick shorts on YouTube. I'm certain that exists out there, and it's horrifying to think about.
Yeah. And we are being conditioned with this because when there's all this information out there, and you feel like there's a lot of information out there, and always the next profile, the next video, the next something will give me even more. Mm-hmm. And you just keep going through it. Now, what are you doing? You were just hitting that thin level surface on all of it. And so you can't go into depth. So your critique of the Jordan issue was there is a depth that's missing here that could, in fact, just really completely, mischaracterize.
Yeah.
And people are almost convinced I don't have time to go any deeper.
Yeah. What do you think is pushing a lot of people in the past, let's just say 20 years, because I'm thinking about the new atheist movement. What is it that pushed so many people, particularly young men, into atheism? Maybe now more than ever before, even though obviously atheism has now been around for, ever at some capacity. But what do you think has pushed a lot of people there?
The atheism which with which most of us are familiar is going to be coming out of the Age of Reason, German Enlightenment, basically your 1800s in Europe. The mid-1700s sees a guy by the name of David Hume, Scottish philosopher, and he makes this claim, the empirical criterion of meaning, that if you have an idea and you can't trace that idea back to a sense impression, senses, 5 of them.
Mm-hmm.
You see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, and whichever one I forgot. Touch it.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't trace it back to one of those, then your idea is meaningless. Well, what's God look like?
Yeah.
What's he smell like? Rattle them off.
Mm-hmm.
I felt him in my heart. Meaningless. Your heart's a muscle. Pumps blood.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I felt him in my spirit. What? I'll cut you open. Show me where that is.
Yeah.
And really what that does is it says, I am only going to count as worthwhile information that falls between these narrow boundaries.
So it's almost like what some people would call like a realist. Like I believe when I can physically see, what I can physically, experience, there is no spirituality. There is no, what someone would say, mystery. It's only what I can experience and rationalize here and now.
Right. And they are, and let me be honest here, they are 100% consistent.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing irrational about that idea, because they're operating within these boundaries of rules.
Mm-hmm.
So they will say, I've got the things that I can sense. That gives me information.
Yeah.
And then I've got the rules of logic that allows me to, move that sensory information around.
Interesting.
And when you've got that, you have a consistent system. Mm-hmm. Now, what we would say as Christians is you have put some blinders up, and while this may work in between here, reality is actually a lot bigger. Because there's a spiritual reality that goes along with that.
Yeah. What do you think is then pushing a lot of young men to that point? Like, if that's the line of thinking, then what has gotten them there? Because I think that there's obviously a lot of people who have, like what you explained with David Hume, they're a realist, whatever you want to call it. It's only what they can experience, what they feel like is understandable, taking the mystery out of it. I also think there's a section that I'm seeing of a lot of young people, as you see kind of a rise in socialist views and communist views that go back more to what was written in the Communist Manifesto, which was the understanding that the church is actually manipulative and that they don't actually care about people. It's just a way to keep powerful people in power and in authority over people. Is that kind of something that you're seeing too, that will take people to that point where then they get into the intellectual side of it? Or is it just purely like, we want to understand how this works and we think this is the best answer we got?
Okay, it was the intellectual side that convinced people that if you take these rules and you look at the church's claim that there is a God is false. It's just not sustainable. And again, within those boundaries, there's a consistent argument.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody said, yeah, this looks right to me. Okay, now this person has nothing but his sense data and his reason.
Mm-hmm.
Again, as we would say as Christians, you're missing an awful lot of life. That's what they experience. This is one reason why that suicide quotient keeps going up.
Yeah.
Because their life now has a consistent reason, but it's not meaningful. It's not supported by anything. And therefore, and this is Nietzsche. Nietzsche nails this one. When you get rid of an idea of God, the job is open, and ultimately you've got to step into the job. And here's the warning: you don't want the job.
Mm-hmm.
You think you do. We all think we do. Wouldn't that be great if I made all the decisions? No.
Yeah. Did Nietzsche say that you don't want the job, or is that something that you're adding in? No one really wants the job.
Oh, he's very clear that it is like having lost your anchor and you're just out at sea. He really kind of is giving this. You're building the ship on the ocean in the middle of the ocean. It is not something that you're going to sit there and think this is a great deal.
But he did believe it was possible to be a Superman, an Ubermensch, as I guess he would say.
That was always his goal. Here's what he says: nature works to produce 4 or 5 great men. These Supermen, and then works to get around them.
Yeah.
So we if that were to even happen, if we were to even find one of those, completely actualized individuals, we'd kill it.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you say that, because I've always thought about it. When I think of a person like Nietzsche, one of the most influential philosophers, we have today, I think a lot of his philosophies and the things that branched off of his writings contribute to a lot of what we see today. And we could get a lot into that. But I always thought it was interesting that he has all these things to say about being, what it means to be that Ubermensch, that Superman. He lived a pretty miserable life, and he died unknown. Like, he was way bigger after his death than he ever was when he was living, as I understand it.
No, he actually had quite a bit of fame near the end of his life.
Near the end, okay.
Now he died stark raving mad, more than likely from he was a conscientious objector, and more than likely came in contact with tainted blood, and died of syphilis and the mental problems that came.
Yeah.
And so and his sister, what a beautiful lady this was. She would kind of wheel him out for people to kind of come in and they'd see his works, and there's Nietzsche over there, and Nietzsche would be kind of raving over him.
She sold off his works, didn't she? Like, after he died?
She was a real piece of work.
Yeah.
Now here's the deal. Nietzsche is no friend of Christians, but atheists don't like to quote Nietzsche, because a lot of the atheists are, as we talked about, kind of this science, natural, realist person.
Mm-hmm.
And Nietzsche would also say, but science doesn't have answers either. Any system that says, I can have all the answers, he says it's a terrible system.
Yeah.
So most of your new atheists, they don't ever quote Nietzsche, because he would criticize them for what they think they know.
So just no one wins if you start quoting him.
No one wins.
Yeah, unless you're one of the 4 or 5 great men. I understand that. So let me ask you then this. I know that you with my friend Niles Head, I think it was just you and him taught an entire class on atheism, for his capstone. You made him read so much atheist books that a year after he graduated, Amazon thought he was an atheist because it kept sending him this stuff. And so it took him a while to fix his algorithm, so it thought that he was a pastor again. So I know for the average person, I'll say it for me as a pastor, I'm incapable of teaching a whole class on atheism. I have not read any David Hume, unfortunately. I'm not familiar enough with all of Nietzsche's stuff, or things about intellectual things of absurdism, or things that we see in the modern age. But what would you say then if you came face to face with a young man who had said, I'm a grounded atheist, this is what I believe. I know you don't have the time to have a whole class session with them, but if you just as a Christian were speaking to him, not as a professor, but just as a Christian talking to someone who's not a Christian, how would you explain your stance about why you have faith, despite obviously being familiar with all of these atheistic works?
Okay. Item number 1, rational arguments do not work because of I'm doing my hand motion here. They have a box within which they will accept certain truths.
Okay.
And so you may be saying something also rational, because I always say the Christian faith is a rational faith. It makes sense, and there's good reasons to believe it.
It's lasted a long time.
Yeah.
Through a lot.
But if you set up parameters as this kind of realist, naturalist atheist who says, all of my good thoughts come in between these two bars, sense impressions, basic logic, then anything you bring in that says, and God, doesn't fit. So the only people who claim to be atheists who follow a rational argument into Christianity are people who were not good atheists to begin with. They weren't as solid on their thoughts as they believed. So one of the things that I would simply say is first of all, let me just tell you why I believe. I do believe that there's good reason for it, but here's the deal. I got a friend, his name is Brett. He lives out in Portland, Oregon. And you don't know him. And he's not even here to show himself. And you might be able to believe me, but you might not believe me that I have this friend. Well, if I can't produce him, why do I believe? Well, because I've met him. I've talked to him. It is personal. It's real. And here's the deal. When it comes to the faith, it is not about believing this, and this. It is about being fully and completely oriented to a new relationship that is made possible in Christ, mediated by the Spirit. And in those moments, I can have a real connection with God. And I can tell you why that makes sense. But my best thing to do is to say, I can also invite you, if you are open to it, to some places where maybe you could experience that too. Because here's the thing, when I sit in church and I'm convicted over something and I pray for forgiveness and I feel the Spirit moving and I feel forgiven, I already couldn't forgive myself. That's why I was convicted and hurting. Like, oh man, I really screwed that up. So when I feel forgiven, and you know what it is to feel forgiven. Why do I know that? Well, because someone is forgiving me. Someone is saying, you know what? You can put this away. And we as Christians, we look at each other and go, that's the Spirit of God who's working in your heart. Who's saying, yes, we can put that away. And we know that because we have both been through it. We've been through that relationship. And we say, yes, you felt that. I felt that. We're feeling the same thing. That doesn't make sense to the guy who's got these particular rules up. But it is a real experience. And you can invite them to have it.
Do you think modern apologetics are getting in the way of evangelism sometimes? We have tons of channels that are out right now, guys and girls that are extremely popular calling themselves apologists. One of my personal favorites is a guy by the name of Wes Huff right now. Went on Joe Rogan Experience. I think the guy's brilliant, especially for being as young as he is. But do you think that there's a possibility that apologetics are getting in the way of being able to effectively share the gospel between people who aren't believers?
If you especially take the apologetic as an argument, one of the things, if apologetics can do anything, it would be to try and say, I know you've got these rules, but if I can show you that at least what I'm thinking is consistent, is reasonable, could I then move to that invitation? Apologetics cannot bring someone to salvation. Just can't. It can bring them to the door, and it can get all the obstacles out of the way of the door, but if they're going to walk through it, it's going to have to be something else. That's where evangelism takes over. That's where that personal, spiritual reality has to take over. And so you can move some of the boxes out of the way of the door with apologetics. I think if apologetics has a failure, it is too often the expectation that all I need to do is learn some arguments and then we can go fill up the baptistry and, we'll just go from argument to baptism. And that's never.
And I feel like there's a problem too if you go in with the mindset of just having an argument. I've been reading a book. Forgive me, I'm forgetting the author's name. He's a professor at the Naval Academy, and he wrote a book called what is it? The Something of Authority. Something of Experts. I can't remember the name of it. Shoot, I just finished reading it. But he essentially, one of the arguments that he makes in it about arguments that we've been having is that we argue now no longer for solutions. We don't argue toward common ground now. What essentially we're doing is, I think I'm right, you think I'm right, and we're just going to go at it until someone just gives up or walks away. He even goes as far as to say, like, facts used to be the referee in this fight. It used to be, this is the moderator that's going to keep everything straight. Right. Now facts are just weapons. I'm going to come at you with my kind of barrel of facts. You'll come with your backpack full of facts, and we're just going to throw stuff back and forth against each other until someone runs out or doesn't have an answer for something. Right. And it's no longer really building toward a solution or an understanding. I think that's the most important part in the evangelism is the understanding. Because I think sometimes what you get to when someone's an atheist, not all the time, but sometimes is there's another layer behind this. That maybe it's not just, I did a lot of reading and I came to this conclusion. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's, my mom was a Christian and God didn't save her when she died of cancer. I thought I could try the church, but then I experienced church hurt and had a really toxic leadership and everything fell apart. So sometimes there's that hidden layers. When you actually get to the understanding of why they think the way they are, it actually gives you a place where, okay, this maybe isn't as much about an argument and he's going to hit me with Hume and I'm going to hit him with this person and back and forth. Maybe it's more of, maybe I can talk to that.
Again, thank you or not thank you, Enlightenment period and Hume and all these guys, because they really are the ones that, of course, what do you call the thing that I can measure with my senses? You call them facts. Mm-hmm. I don't live according to facts. Now, I have facts. I know facts. Oh, yay, hooray, that's good. I know stuff. But I live according to meaning. Mm. Meaningfulness is what is important in life. It's not what does this fact say. It really is what does it mean. Mm. And if there's anything to do, if there's any problem in the church, it is how often we think on the level of facts about Scripture rather than what is the theological meaning that that is being conveyed in this text.
Yeah, and a lot of pastors are missing that now as well.
Yeah. And this is this is part of the attraction of a Jordan Peterson who takes things to a level of meaning, psychological level of meaning, a Jungian Carl Jung level of meaning. And I go, that's a very interesting reading. It's not always the correct theological level of meaning. Mm-hmm. And a pastor has to be able to get people to that. Mm-hmm. And if there is anything, and there's levels of meaning. Please stop with the Christian narcissism. What does this passage have to say about me? Oh, I read this. What should I do? How can I apply this to me? If those are the first questions out of your mouth about a text, then you are a Christian narcissist. The Bible is a story about God.
Yeah, God's the main character in the story.
God is the main character. Now, can I then learn things about me and apply things? Yes. But very often, it's here's what happened in the story, and this is for me. Oh, okay, that is a level of meaning, but let's go to the foundational meaning.
Mm-hmm.
What does this say about God?
Yeah.
So even if you get past facts, and even if you get to the level of meaning, sometimes we still can't get out of the way of ourselves and say, "What's it mean for me?"
Yeah.
What's it say about God?
Yeah. And I'm so grateful that I had great professors like y'all, brilliant men, men that sometimes, thankfully, men that didn't think exactly like I did and didn't think exactly like, some of the people I grew up listening to. Even, my father came to Oakland City, and there was some lessons, not that he wasn't a great pastor, a great preacher, but, it's just, even in just in 18 years of living and sitting under preaching, probably only like 5 where I can comprehend anything. There's just questions that you have or things you don't even think about don't get answered. And I'm so grateful I had just a great seminary, brilliant men who worked with me to help me understand things, to help me be critical of that. And what I always say is they tore down everything. You guys are willing to tear down everything and then help me begin to rebuild that in something a more meaningful way. And so one thing I would say I'd love to talk with you about is you have a new program that's coming up at Oakland City.
Yes.
I believe focused on graduate level degrees. Am I right? Or is it undergraduate as well?
This is a graduate level degree, Master of Arts in Contextual Ministry. It is built for, the problem is people just cannot uproot themselves, move to Oakland City, and do 2, maybe 3 years of study.
Especially if you're like 30, 40 years old, you already have kids and a wife and all that.
Incredibly hard to do that nowadays. Even from Evansville to Oakland City, 30 some miles that's at least an hour or more out of your day. And if you got to pick up kids, so here's the deal. Why don't we just bring the seminary to the church?
Mm-hmm.
And have classes not only just for the pastor, ministers, lay leaders, congregation. One of the things, we often find that people are worried that the seminary is going to teach, not to maybe kind of tear down and rebuild some good stuff. It's like, they might be sacrificing chickens. We don't know. Don't go there. So look, we'll come and we'll do it all in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
We'll come to the church. We will give you classes in the church so that, and we will work with your ministers. We'll work with things that they want to learn about in order to build better ministers in the setting in which they are.
I have a question with that. I'm immediately thinking about cost. Obviously one of the first things that gets brought up, may not have exact numbers yet. Are you thinking it's something that'll be charged individually, or is this more something of like pay this price and then whoever comes and wants to be a part of it can?
Yeah, looking at the second option.
The second option.
So, and here's the nice thing about the second option is that we're not going to get rich doing this, but we want to get theological education to the churches. So if one church looks at it and says, you know what, we can't necessarily afford to get this class. Okay, get a sister church.
Yeah.
Come in and say,
get a whole association.
Get an association to say, hey, let's do this. Now we'll cap it. We're not going to have like 500 people in a class. In order to have a good master's class, Jesus has it right. 12, maybe 15 students. You get beyond that, and you're a little. You start getting too many voices in the room. But if you pull together a couple of different churches and say, hey, I've got 3-4 ministers. 2-3 different churches can come together, and we can come to one hub, in those churches, and say, hey, let's sit down. Let's actually do a class.
Yeah. Are you prepared to interact with us lower non-masters having people who are out there? Are you ready for some of the wild questions that might get brought up to you?
Oh yeah. We had you in class. I don't
Yeah,
know how,
you
we've
did.
got to be as prepared as we possibly can be. I can't imagine. No, to be honest, truthfully, that's why you have these classes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you invite anybody anybody who can take it, come in and take it.
Yeah.
Because it's not just good for other people to experience the crazy questions. It's good for the teacher
Yeah.
to experience.
Well, let me ask you this. This is something that I've seen, before pastoring church. I've seen it in school a few times. You have people who, once they get some people, that's not all people, but some people, you get to a certain period in life, a certain age, whatever it is, your religious beliefs are almost calcified. It's like your political beliefs. They're just calcified. You're not basically going to change where you're at. And so sometimes when you're met with this kind of not even criticism, but a teaching that goes against what you have, for some people, it may be something as simple as, conversation we had in class one time. When you die, you don't become an angel.
Right.
There's a lot of Christians believe that, scarily, if not a majority. And you run into that, and you immediately got to tell someone that's not true. Or maybe, someone has a personal theology that's a, combled up mess of things. And, they're a Arminian, but they also believe in the perseverance of the saints. Uh, you know, uh, they're Catholic, but they don't believe, this about marriage, and they believe that there should be a woman priest. They're Baptist, but they don't want to be rebaptized because they were baptized as a baby in a Methodist church, and they don't think they should have to be rebaptized. You run into all that stuff. How do you then address as a teacher? And I'm hoping pastors who are watching can kind of learn from that. How do you address people who have those beliefs calcified, but that whatever system structure they're working in, it doesn't work?
Two things. Item number one, stop reading theology like an atheist.
Okay, what does that mean?
It is that atheistic enlightenment that said facts. And you read it, so you know this thing, and so if I know this thing, that's the thing that I know. And atheism is the one that kind of taught us, really, that to take a reading of scripture, say, well, I believe this, 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 and this. Just the same way as I would say, I look at physics and I understand this is gravity, this is how the atom works, and I just go down this, 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 and this.
Yeah.
Stop reading it that way. Second, what is it about? It's about a relationship with God. God is revealing himself in Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if he's revealing himself and it's a relationship, well, just think, when you said I do, did you stop learning about your spouse?
Mm-hmm.
Because my bet is you're going to be both 90 on your deathbed going, we never owned a Plymouth. Yeah, we did. And you're going to be learning something new about your spouse. You're always going to be learning. And the best relationships are those that continue to learn.
Yeah. So how do you then react when people, are just, they're adamant about it? I don't want to learn. I don't, and this isn't necessarily, when it comes to your classes, you're talking about people just walk out.
Right, yeah. You're free to leave.
But you might have some pastors come in, they learn some new things, they make corrections to their teachings, it comes out in the pulpit, and people start turning on them, and they're like, oh, seminary ruined you. Like I was told, a church that wanted to hire me, I said, no, I'm going to go to seminary. And they're like, it'll ruin you. It'll ruin your preaching.
Yes, you get that. You get that stuff all the time. Which again is one reason to say, I bet we have something worth offering, and we'll come to you and do it in front of anybody who wants to meet it.
Yeah.
So, if we do say something crazy, then, you can challenge us right there in your space, in your church, and you can say, I thought it was all going to heaven when you die. Actually, it's about a new heaven and new earth and a new body.
No, people aren't ready to hear that, Dr. Mercer.
Yeah, it's crazy talk, even though it's all throughout the Bible.
And all throughout church history.
Church history. So, go ahead. And so, very often, I do think that part of the problem with seminaries is we have a PR problem. You come in and you think, people are going to go there and they're going to get these new crazy ideas. We have a distance problem. We'll just come to you and we'll just make the meal right on the table. It's going to be hibachi. You're going to see everything that we do.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, don't have us back.
Yeah. You're filling the gaps of all the excuses that people give. And so now you've essentially put the ball in their court and be like, hey, we're offering it to you. We will do everything. We'll do all the churches, every pastor in your denomination, not denomination, but association, will do it too. I think that's very honorable. I'm excited to see how that'll work. When do you think it'll start?
We've already run pilot courses.
Okay.
So pilot courses have run on December 12th. We got notice that Higher Learning Commission has accredited the degree. So
wow.
It's actually ready to go.
That's a big deal. It is.
So I've reached out to some pastors on my advisory council for first shot at this and sent out a couple of, feeler emails. So it is ready to go come January. But 8 weeks, we can do some kind of, soft starts. We can do things along, maybe some dates in the church that work best. Maybe you've got like a night starting.
So you're making it even a bit flexible for people too, for now at least, figuring out what it's like. No excuses. That's awesome. I love hearing that. It sounds like really interesting. And this isn't just, Joe Schmo who's done Sunday school for 20 years at his church. This is real PhD having professors, real ministry experience, some of them who are going to be teaching this.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Lau did a course in parables for us, and he had Klein Snodgrass, who wrote the book on parables, come in and do a session with him. Dr. Jim Ware at the University of Evansville, he has his PhD from Yale, is going to do some classes for us. He studied under Mallarby, who wrote this influential commentary on Thessalonians. So we've got people who can give you a very worthwhile education.
Yeah, this isn't just some online course that you paid a few $100s and you blew through it in a week. This is
right.
This is a real deal.
But it will at least also, contrary to the online, you're going to have weekly interaction with the professor. And so the professor can kind of, hit the gas or hit the brakes and in order to kind of, help the class along.
And is it really just a lecture series, or is there going to be like homework and reading that goes along with this?
It'll have the whole deal.
Okay.
The other thing, though, is we're going to do stackable certificates, where you might think, what we really need here is we just need some New Testament work. Well, I've got 3 courses in New Testament that'll give you like a New Testament certificate, and you can stop there. And you will have an accredited certificate with accredited courses, and you can take those courses to any accredited university.
Oh, wow. And they'll accept them. So for instance, if I took some of these courses, then I say, all right, I'm just going to throw out a name, Asbury over in Kentucky. Then because these are accredited courses by real professors, then there are universities out there that would accept them and put them towards an MDiv, for instance.
They'll accept them to put them towards something else.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So, and so you can really essentially stack 4 or 5 certificates together, and when you get to the 36 hours, you will have a master's from us. So you can focus something in your church. You can go for the whole deal. You can do 2 or 3 together, and maybe go to Asbury, or maybe it becomes too much. You want to do Liberty and do a little slower online stuff. It is. We have tried to tailor this. That again, no excuses. If you want anything like a seminary level education, we can come and make it happen for you.
Any pastor who's watching out there, a deacon who, or an elder who feels like they have a responsibility to know the Bible when they're trying to lead a church, the excuses seem to be completely off the table as long as you're willing to invest a little bit of money and a lot of time into it. So that sounds like an incredible program, something that I think a lot of pastors and leaders will be interested in. And I think it'd be a great start to have. Last question. You need to have a bachelor's degree to start this, don't you? For it to count as an actual accreditation?
No.
No. Okay.
No. This is through the Association of Theological Schools, one of our accreditors. And our accreditation right now is with the Higher Learning Commission, ATS. We have it in for that. My expectation is we will get the ATS accreditation. Having that, they are very aware of churches needing good theological help.
Mm-hmm.
And it used to be that I could take 10% of my group and have them not have a bachelor's degree. Now, all they are asking for is, can I make a good case for this person to start in a master's level program? What's a good case look like? Well, first of all, if you've worked in a church for a while, then you are getting a lot of that experience already. So how about a resume, and you have somebody in your association or a pastor who can say, look, this person would really benefit from this, and we say he can do the work. If you have that kind of support, then we can let you in without a bachelor's degree.
Yeah. I think I've asked every hard question. I think I can ask you details about the program. If there's anyone who's interested in being in this program, I'm going to put a link down in the description. I know there's been some graphics that have come up that people will get to see. Okay. I appreciate you coming on, Dr. Mercer, to talk about this new program. If you ever have time in the future, which I know you will have because of these ridiculously long breaks that y'all are getting now, I'd love to have you back on. Thank you for joining me, sir.